What is up, Copy Squad? It's your boy Kyle Milligan of KyleTheWriter.com, and today we're going to talk about ethics in advertising and marketing, basically about the social responsibility of copywriters. I brought a special guest on. Once again, this is Sean. Tell us about yourself, Sean.
I am the associate publisher of Laissez-Faire and Choose Yourself Financial. I also run Mark Ford, otherwise known as Michael Masterson's business.
Okay, so basically the point of Sean's presence is we're going to talk about ethics in advertising and marketing, and what responsibilities, like social responsibilities, a copywriter has. And so I got a Twitter message. It was basically like, hey man, I'm not being a hater, which I really appreciate him starting like that, because I'm not being a hater, but have you considered like the moral and like ethical position of selling financial advice when it has been like economists have proven that you cannot predict the market, I believe is what he said. And I think I think that's like a cool point. I think that's a smart point of view to take, like to look at the bigger picture like that. But I think that's actually a really almost easy to answer question. And I kind of want to talk about that question in particular, because I think we can knock that one out pretty quick.
Yeah.
But then kind of expand into like the broader, reaches of like, scammy, hypey copywriting and all that stuff, because it seems to be like so many beginners' main objections. Like, man, I want to write copy, I want to sell things, but do I have to write those sleazy sales letters? And I think they get tied up and they become concerned about like the ethics of it, right? And the social responsibilities behind, like, are you shilling a bad product? And I think what gets confused, and I'll talk about this more in just a moment, I think what gets confused is the idea of like really, I would say hypey or like effective sales copy and like messaging versus like shilling a bad product, because that's something you never want to do, put out like a garbage product.
Right.
Okay. First, let's talk about the original question, which was basically, how do you sell financial advice if economists have already proven that you cannot predict the markets?
Well, I mean, not to get all nerdy about it, but it is actually very easy to beat the markets. Like, for example, if you buy $1,000 of the S&P 500, it goes down a certain amount. You buy another $1,000, your cost basis has gone down. The S&P goes back up to where it was. The S&P 500 has had a net gain of 0, but you have had a gain greater than the market. Therefore, you have beaten the market in that set amount of time.
Right, and I think even to play devil's advocate and challenge that. So the question didn't actually say like, I think it's been proven a million ways you can beat the market. I mean, you just have to look to like the classic example of like the Warren Buffetts of the world, like the Ray Dalios, the dudes who have consistently beaten the market.
Yeah, or Jim Simons, who literally has had 30% compound annualized gains for like decades.
Right.
Using quantitative algorithmic trading.
So like part of, I think, the answer to that question is to like start a new question, which would be like, would it be immoral to ask those guys for advice? Right? Would it be immoral if those guys said, you know what, I'll tell you my strategies? So,
I personally don't think that is necessarily immoral, but I think that's a complicated question.
Yeah.
I don't think anybody listening to this right now would say, hey, it's immoral to get trading advice from Warren Buffett. That's one of the reasons why so many people, download and read his shareholder letters. They want to know what he's buying, and people base their investing decisions on that. And most of those people have done great and beaten the broader markets.
Right.
So,
and I think that brings us like full circle, because that question in itself makes sense if you're selling a bad product.
Yeah.
If you're selling something that doesn't really help anybody, if you're selling something that doesn't perform the things that it says it will perform, and we're about to enter that weird mix of, well, what about those hypey sales letters?
Yeah.
So now, are you selling a bad product because you didn't necessarily make $10 million in 1 week?
Yeah.
So at that point, the product, and that's where I think I want to draw the line. Like, I don't think it's immoral to sell financial advice. It's because also
especially if you're selling the real deal.
We only sell research.
Yeah.
Like, by law, we can only tell you research about the financial markets.
Exactly.
So
we have a publisher's exemption with the SEC.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think one of the next moving forward into it is more about the copy. I think that's where people get twisted up, and they're like, but the copy's so hypey. There's all these huge promises, and it's so sleazy and salesy and blah blah blah. Okay,
I would like to speak to that in particular.
Do.
For me, it comes down to a question. What is the difference between like a scam and an actual like info product that you're selling? Like, what is that fine line that distinguishes a scam from not a scam?
I think it would have to be the obvious choice. It's the intention. The intention is to basically just steal all your cash,
right, versus
I'm going to give you this product in exchange for cash.
I would say that that's exactly it. So like people will see our copy and our promises, and they will automatically assume, oh, this must be a scam, when we're over here spending literally millions of dollars to produce actual products that we send to people so that we can help them make more money, or navigate a difficult financial situation, or get advice on a particular health issue. Mm-hmm. We specifically are very invested in fulfilling on every single promise that we make in copy, mm-hmm, no matter how hypey it is.
Right. Okay, so let's talk about that hypey copy, and that's something that I want to speak on. And I think this is really important, and it dives right back into my general platform as like a person on YouTube marketing my own products right here, right now. Yeah. My main message is that copywriting is a language, and it is not a language like people believe it to be super easy to learn because it is written in simple English. However, the meaning, the subtext that's communicated beneath the words is actually much more, it's like complex because it's a language that you've probably never learned to speak. Like you've never had actual education on this is how you speak. And that language is the subcommunication of emotion. So whenever you're writing copy, you're speaking directly to your emotional brain. We're talking directly to the croc brain or the lizard brain or whatever you want to call it. That old fighter, the amygdala. Okay, whatever, guy. So anyway, we're speaking to that, and you've never been formally trained to talk to that. You've been formally trained to make factual arguments and factual statements and say things that make logical sense. And you have been, I guess, maybe over time, you have begun to believe that that's what makes people do things, is logic, rationality, like thought processes. Yeah. But what is really happening, and I can compare this to several things, is we write the way we write because we're trying to persuade. And the most efficient way to do that is to speak directly to the emotional part of the brain. So my whole book, Take Their Money, here comes the plug, is at kylethewriter.com/book. You know,
I beta read it in an early draft, and it is actually very, very good. I've read a lot of books on copy, and I would say that for somebody actually trying to sit down, write a sales letter, and learn that distinction between a normal register of language and a sales register of language, your book breaks it down extremely well because it does get into the specific codes. I would say it's like you unveil the coded language of copy and sales. And that is ultimately what you were getting across in the book, I think, in my opinion.
I appreciate that. Well, there's a testimonial right there in real time from the publisher of like a zillion businesses who's read a lot of copy. But yeah, so what I do in the book is I try to instruct you on a new way of thinking things. Because instead of approaching it as I'm going to use these English words to say this English thing that's very rational, I'm teaching you how to speak directly to the emotional part of the brain. And this is where you see that as a person on the outside looking in at a sales letter. And you see those words and you see how much excitement they're meant to convey and how much emotion they're meant to stir up. And as a logical person who's not the target audience most of the time looking at that, you go, well, these words seem very extreme. Now, I want to compare this to basically romance, dating, and like attraction. Okay? Yeah. I want to compare this to basically, let me tell you something I learned in the dating game. I learned in the dating game very early on.
After this, can I make this a little bit more nerdy so that I can tolerate this conversation?
Yeah, so in the dating game, I learned, actually I didn't learn early on, I learned late on. And when I learned this was a big game changer for me, was basically that, you know, all the little things that you're worried about as a person, all your little insecurities, nobody else makes them a big deal unless you make them a big deal. Most of the time, they don't even matter. As a matter of fact, the less you think about them and the less you care about them, the more attractive you become. because byproduct is you become confident. And when you become confident, you are communicating subtly all these things you don't realize you're communicating. The way you stand, the way you walk, the way you talk, your presence completely changes.
Yeah.
Now you're doing all this sub-communication through body language and through the way you carry yourself, and it's all because your emotions are transmitting a new signal, and it's due to confidence, okay? So if I do learn how to become confident, and that makes me now more appealing to women, right?
Yeah.
Am I a scam? Or have I simply learned how to subtly communicate through the subtext of my body language and the way I carry myself, how to manipulate their emotions to find me more attractive? That's what we're doing with the words on the page. We're using the words to set up the scene of that confident person that's more attractive, right? These words are attractive because they trigger those emotions. They trigger a different set of emotions. They trigger your persuasion and sales emotions. But is it a scam, or is it immoral? You know, is it unethical to learn that skill set and to trigger it on purpose?
I would say that depends on the fulfillment, and you might have a lot of ex-girlfriends who might speak to that. Yes, perhaps that was indeed a scam. But I'm giving you a hard time. Like, no, I don't think that that's immoral. And like, let me ground it in a more specific example from your own life. Trump bonus checks.
Okay.
For me, with copywriting, a lot of how I learned how to copywrite, I looked back to a lot of rhetoricians, to Aristotle, to Socrates, to the rhetoricians of ancient Greece and things like that. And I dug really deeply into like the flowers of rhetoric and things like that. And so for me, the phrase Trump bonus checks is no different than my love is a red, red rose. It's a metaphor. Trump bonus checks is a justifiable, grounded metaphor for dividend-paying companies, which, by the way, we have economic proof beats the market. So, like, for me, if you look at Trump bonus checks, dividend-paying companies that benefit from a specific opportunity in the macro economy, all of a sudden you have a grounded metaphor that makes it enticing and, you know, really exciting for people, a specific demographic of people, let's be honest. That is no different from a metaphor like my love is a red, red rose. That's it.
I like that.
Also we fulfill it, and that portfolio has been killing it recently.
Right. I think that's another important thing, and it also comes back to, there's another point I wanted to make here. So the first thing is, like, let's talk about the hypey sales copy. We kind of addressed that, right? Like, when you really think about it, we're simply using what works. Just like a woman wears makeup and heels and does her hair. Does that make her a scam? Does that make her unethical? Does that make her immoral to make herself more attractive? Or does she know that this triggers the response that she desires, and she utilizes that for her advantage, right? You don't go around and say, scam, Maybelline, down with them, that's not how it works. You just know that's what works, and so it makes sense to do it that way. So when we write that hypey copy, it needs to be written that way because we know that this is the makeup. You don't just write plain, boring words and go out without makeup. You make that up. You put makeup all over it. Okay, so there's...
For me, like, I compare that to, like, the Apple computer ad from, like, 1984 that was all dressed up like you're fighting against Big Brother and you're throwing a sledgehammer against this big picture of Big Brother up there. And, you know, a Macintosh computer is not revolutionary. Mm-hmm. That's a metaphor. And you're trying to tack on these big, you know, really impressive and like grandiose ideas to a very ordinary thing. And that fundamentally is no different from, you know, Robert Burns, my love is a red, red rose.
Okay, so we talked about the dressing up the copy essentially, right? Yeah. Wear clothes that flatter your figure. Okay, does that count? Like something like that? I'm not calling you out. I'm just saying, like, those kinds of things, like whatever way you want to think about it, whatever way you want to look at it. That's the way I see it works.
It's a good metaphor
to do it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so that's one thing. So, okay, we've addressed predicting the market and beating the market. All right, the next thing, it can be done. People do it all the time. They're on the news. So the point 3 was, okay, can't predict, but we can beat. What about salesy copy? We write salesy copy because it works. It transmits directly to the emotional thing. Yeah. And then point 3, I think you just hit. And that my point 3 was to say, sell them what they want, give them what they need. And I think I got that from Matt Fury, who is Chris Haddad, Chris Haddad, I think is how you say it. He's like a genius copywriter who wrote in the the dating niche. He wrote Text Your Ex Back, that
Yeah.
sales letter, I think, and it was like it made him famous. Like
Yeah.
it was such a good sales letter. And basically, the point he made, which I stand by too, is that you okay. I hate to keep coming back to the makeup thing, right?
Can we please find another metaphor?
Let's try something else. Okay.
A dude in a suit. How about a dude in a suit?
Well, dude in a suit's great. Dude in a suit is great. If you are the best, let's say, real estate agent, okay, in the world, and you show up in a flower shirt and
Looking like
sandals, right? Then I am not going to buy a house with you. You just don't look the part.
Right.
Like, you just do not interest me. You don't look like someone who can help me make money.
Yeah.
But whenever you write the salesy, hypey copy, right? When you do the things that hit their emotions, you're giving them what they want. What they need is the house that's perfect for them, right? But they won't even listen to you if you're not wearing the suit and tie. So you have to be communicating and hitting those emotional triggers. I mean, we're not dishonest marketers for being good at marketing. That's what makes me angry. Like,
I mean, there is an element of social responsibility there that I think, in ethical marketing, as long as you don't say anything that's fundamentally untrue, as long as your financial package contains necessary risk language that has been vetted by a compliance department, which all of ours is, as long as you are making efforts to fulfill on every single promise that you make and justify those promises with actual evidence that is vetted by a compliance department, there's nothing ethical or socially irresponsible. I mean, again, like, we're not running a charity.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we're not trying to, change the world or...
we're selling advice.
Yeah, we're selling advice. And we're selling advice so that the prospect has a better life and we have a better life.
At the end of the day, every copywriting book will tell you this: don't sell a bad product. Doesn't say don't use hypey copy. It says don't sell a bad product.
Yeah.
Use what you gotta use to get the good product sold. I think that's the moral of the story. Thanks so much for tuning in, Copy Squad. Please go to kylethewriter.com/book and check out my book, which is Take Their Money. Peace out, Copy Squad.
Bye.